Good afternoon, good morning, good evening, depending on where you are in the world. We've got a truly international speaker roster with us today, so all of those are actually valid. It's early afternoon for me. It's early in the morning for Kate from the Cotton Incorporated side. It's slightly later in the afternoon for Quentin, and it's evening for Jenny. There's also going to be a bunch of folks watching this on demand as well. So wherever time zone it is for you, I hope you're enjoying that stage of the day. I'm also dealing with a very uncharacteristic UK problem of having too much sun streaming in through the window. So if you see kind of like shadows moving across my face, it's not normally the issue that we have here. Normally, I'm worried about rain rather than that. Anyway, welcome to the second in what's, I think, become an annual series of webinars between Cotton Incorporated and the Interline. Last year, we had myself, Kate, and Brendan, a friend of ours from J. Crew. This year, there's four of us. We actually expanded on things. And the panelists, I'm going to ask to introduce themselves shortly, and you'll get to know a little bit more about them and their different areas of expertise. If you don't happen to know who I am, super quick, editor-in-chief of the Interline tech publication for the fashion industry. Spent a lot of time thinking about and talking about and analyzing digital product creation for fashion and digital materials and the digital materials supply chain as a specific piece of that. The title in front of us today and the topic in front of us today is around scaling the digital materials supply chain. And implicit in that title is the idea that digital product creation itself, so 3D design, simulation, product development, visualization, is also scaling upwards. And that's scaling upwards because different brands, different disciplines, different people have found compelling use cases for having digital representations of real products. And as those use cases grow, and as demand for digital assets scales up with those, that's placing a new demand on the supply of digital fabrics that properly reflect those use cases, that hit the right level of visual fidelity, performance accuracy, and so on. But actually painting it as a straightforward trajectory where there's a higher demand for 3D that translates into a higher demand for digital fabrics to use in 3D, and that cycle will just smoothly continue, is probably not the right way to think about it. So what we're going to do today is to actually break down some of the incentives, some of the standards, some of the solutions, some of the ideas, and the general supply chain and ecosystem around the creation of digital fabrics to understand where does it all stand now? What does it mean for it to scale? What is the gap between here and there? And for all of the different people involved in the digital materials supply chain, what does it mean for them all to benefit? So I'm going to start by asking each of our panel members to introduce themselves a little bit. I'm going to ask each of them to tell us about what their day-to-day lives look like, what their roles are, and what they're specifically working on at the moment. Kate, for me, you're the first on the left, so I'm going to put you on the spot first.
Wonderful. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here with you. My name is Catherine Absher. I'm the manager of fashion and digital design for Cotton Incorporated. If you don't know who we are, Cotton Incorporated is a not-for-profit organization that's dedicated to the research and promotion of cotton. We provide a wide range of information, some technical assistance, and different innovation to help support companies with their cotton-related business, including apparel and home textiles to like fiber products in the health and beauty space. One of the resources that we offer are inspirational textiles fabrics. And so in my role, I create digital twins of those fabrics. And today we have a pretty good sized collection of digital fabrics that are available for free online. I think it's quite a unique resource that I think a lot of people who know about digital materials, they know about our site and our materials. So in case you don't and you're here, you can go to our educational resource website, cottonworks.com, if you're interested, and you can create an account for free to see all those materials today. A couple other things that I do is I create like educational and promotional materials. So I work a lot in 3D software work a lot with digital materials. I do a lot of like educational events, seminars, webinars like this one. So yeah, and I've been fortunate enough to meet each of you today through this work.
Amazing. Thank you very much. Quentin, you're next. Tell us a bit about who you are, your role, and what you're working on day to day at the minute.
Hi guys, my name is Quinten Schaap. I am the founding director and head of digitization at BAKERMAT. We are a independent textile platform based in Antwerp, Belgium. Our focus is on bridging the gap between physical and digital textiles. We curate and sell high quality fabrics and we digitize them to make them accessible for use in various 3D environments. Our clients range from fashion schools and emerging designers to more established brands, textile mills, and museums. Right now, we are scaling our 3D materials studio and expanding our resource event. Our resource event is a sourcing event where designers can explore and buy physical fabrics and increasingly access their digital twins as well. So yeah, basically my day-to-day involves managing digitization workflows, building partnerships with mills, schools, and ensuring digital materials are both technically and visually accurate.
Perfect. Jenny, same question to you.
Perfect. So it's really nice to be here. I'm Jenny Peterson from New Focus Textiles, and we're in Hong Kong. We are woven fabric manufacturers, and we work with fashion brands and retailers to create fabrics for them from concept to product delivery. And we ship our fabrics to garment factories that take over the next step in the supply chain. So we are tier 2 fabric manufacturers. And we've been on the digital fabric journey since January. And it's been really fantastic to see physical fabrics transform into the digital space. And now we have about 35 digital fabrics, so it's growing. And we see it as it's a really interesting marketing tool, and we can use it to showcase fabrics in a new way. And also we can communicate with brands in a way that helps them see the potential to use the digital fabrics to save time on their fabric development, their lead times, and to get more creative with 3D platforms. So we actually make the physical fabric, and then we outsource the creation of the 3D file, and then we integrate other information and data into the file to pass it to the brands. So we don't use the 3D software ourselves, but we we establish the file to share. So it's a learning journey. We're still learning about the digital process.
Amazing. So I think we've got some pretty different but complementary perspectives on the whole digital materials supply chain here. And I'm going to do another question to all three of you in sequence. And Kate, I'm going to start with you again for this one, which is, where, from your perspective, is fashion currently investing the most heavily? That can be time, money, and hopefully seeing the most return when it comes to 3D. Where is most of it happening? Because it gets talked about a lot in visualization and content creation, particularly at the minute, but it's less easy to see how far upstream the typical kind of 3D strategy extends. So, Catherine, what's your perspective on this? Where is the most 3D happening, and how far upstream is it currently going?
I think in terms of how far upstream it stretches, probably not far enough, would be our perspective as of right now. I think a lot of what I've seen is more around scaling and standardizing existing efforts. And a lot of that is concentrated a little bit further downstream, than kind of the three of us are mainly focused. It's really a lot more in the product development. And then down after that, marketing, planning, that kind of thing. I think I like everybody else, though, I think I've also seen a lot of focus on at least interest and experimentation with AI features, incorporating AI into existing tools, especially. It's also been interesting to see some of the consolidation and the new partnerships among the materials service provider platforms earlier this year as well.
Great. Quentin, how about your point of view? Where do you see most of the attention on 3D being focused, and how much of it comes upstream towards the material supplier?
Well, I think what we see, I think most of the industry's efforts in 3D still goes a lot into this visualization. We see, I think people see it still a little bit as a fun tool, something to try out, to do something for with their lookbooks or with campaigns, or get like a bit of innovative touch to their concepts or something like this. But I think where there still is, I think, a huge gap and a real opportunity is in seeing how can we utilize this as an actual tool for change and an actual tool to make the supply chain stronger, but also more sustainable in many ways. Because I think without accurate, and I think the opportunity there lies in digitization of the raw materials. That's something that we do, because I think without accurate digital fabrics, the 3D design cannot fully deliver on its potential, basically. I think for digitization to scale, they need to be more, there needs to be more than one incentive, basically, to digitize a material. It should not only be for this visualization part, but it should also be for internal processes, or, for example, brands or suppliers, manufacturers. One of the things we help, or we feel there is a lot of question for demand for, is using 3D to create custom, not yet physically existing colorways, for example. So we digitize one material, client of the supplier comes with a question for new colorways, and we can digitally recolor on the yarn, and then we can showcase these new colorways the client is proposing. Because I think that helps guide clients towards more conscious and reduce unnecessary physical development as well. So yeah, I believe when digital materials start serving not only the visualization, but design, sourcing, decision making as well, it can really become part of the brand's infrastructure, and not just function as a visual tool, basically.
Yeah, I think that's very fair. I think there's a fundamental difference between, and we'll see this as we get further on. It's a fundamental difference between visually representing something and actually representing it as a producible product. And I think a lot of 3D strategies are going through that transition at the moment. Jenny, same question to you. Anything you want to add on this one?
Yeah, I think both of you, what you just said, it's very, I think it's absolutely correct. So, you know, if you had asked me a year ago what I thought a digital fabric was, I would say, you know, when we first started this journey, I thought it was a scan, and then you input the physical data as well. So you have those two elements. But actually, it can be a package that has so many other files and other data within a set. So you can have certifications, you can have traceability, you can have different layers of information that are within the file. You can have your life cycle and performance data. You can have your network connectivity and interoperability. You can have your test reports for your seam slippage and your tearing. So as what Quentin said, you know, right now the demand is much more visual. People are using it as a design tool and a way to speed up development, reduce waste, and ultimately that will save costs. So in that regard, it's meeting a lot of the demands for the textile and fashion industry, which are, you know, faster, cheaper, more sustainable. And so digital fabrics will help that. But also I think digital fabrics are a way to communicate something visual in in a way that can be machine readable, in a way that can be
Yep.
processed through AI, and it's data that can be organized instead of being, strictly a visual or physical
Yep.
item.
No, that makes sense. And I think there's a key distinction there. I've got in trouble for saying scanning before when what I actually mean is fabric testing. And I think everyone's fallen into a similar boat. But again, you have a way of visually representing a fabric and communicating that, and then you have a way of capturing and using the full complement of its physical attributes, which and those things determine what you do with it. I'm going to stay with you, Jenny, for my next question, which is about what the demand actually looks like from the supplier side, because I think we're in a slightly rocky space when it comes to digital product creation strategies for brands at the moment. We can get into this a little bit deeper, but something the Interline will be covering in our DPC report towards the end of the year. I think it'll be clear, it's going to become quite clear quite quickly where 3D strategies kind of stay the line, and then where potentially things diverge and AI takes over. But whatever happens, the textile supplier is the person who's on the sharp end of that ask. That person's on the sharp end of the demand. And that's the demand as it stands today. So that's brands saying, I need you to supply me with digital versions of these fabrics that I can use in 3D prototyping, in 3D simulation, and so on. But also to get ahead of what the future demand might look like. What does that look like now? Who is the real kind of consumer for digital fabrics, and what are they actually asking for from suppliers?
I think that we see garment factories are using the files, but also huge brands. I mean, global brands. And they're using it to create shoes and clothing and apparel. And you can see it on their point of sale. If you go on some of these huge websites, I would say 50% of the images now, they don't need to be photographs. They can be digitally created to show different colorways. So they're being used in the product selling. And when we have brands, different brands now are using also different platforms, and so different files need to be created in different formats. So for us, we've limited it to creating in 2 different formats. So we did that based on feedback from our brands on which formats they're using for their garment design and development. So that's a tool that we're providing to the brands. But there's not a huge demand for that yet, but it is growing. It is growing.
Okay, perfect. And Quentin, same question to you, but on the opposite side. So I want to get an idea of what the finer shape of that demand looks like for brands and creators, the people who have a need for digital representations of fabrics, but for either practical or economic reasons, which we'll get into in a minute, they're not scanning/capturing those things themselves. What are they actually looking to use digital fabrics for? Do they see them in a kind of opportunistic way as a way of saying, I have a particular style, particular collection I want to develop in 3D, and I want to be able to experiment with some digital fabrics as an aid to that? Or are they also looking at them as a way to actually extend and collaborate across their supply chain? And they're looking at those as a way to forge connections and collaborations with new partners? Or do those two things go hand in hand?
Well, I think of course, as you said, for most brands and creators, I think digital fabrics are still primarily a design and development tool. They want to see, or they ask from a supplier, if they have to ask from a supplier or from us to be able to see this material in 3D, how it drapes, how it reflects light before committing to physical sampling. But we're actually seeing, I think, a little bit of a shift happening, and digital fabrics are becoming but also a discovery and collaboration tool. I think we see it with designers using our 3D library. They often discover new mills because we communicate the mills that we work with through finding a nice 3D material. And maybe these are mills they wouldn't have found otherwise. So of course, this slowly but steady, I think people start to realize that if there are sort of like databases and libraries of digital materials, this could be used basically as a sourcing tool for physical materials as well as digital materials. And that's really where we as BAKERMAT fit in, because we sit between the textile supplier and the digital creator. We curate, digitize, and distribute these textiles, so they're both physically available for sourcing and digitally available for creation. So yeah, I think sometimes what starts as a practical design tool then can evolve into a new connection and create basically a bridge between creators and our textile partners.
Perfect. That's a great answer. Thank you very much. Catherine, I'm going to come to you in a minute. For the audience, just a reminder here. So at the moment, the structure is I'm asking these folks questions and kind of host prerogative. I've got a few more of these that I want to get through. If while Jenny, Quentin, Catherine are all speaking, if there's anything that you can think of that you want to ask them, we have a Q&A box, so feel free to jot your questions in there. When we get to the end of the scripted questions, I will then pick out the best ones of those and I will put them to Kate, Quentin, and Jenny. If there's any that we don't have time to get to, we can take those offline as well. But just a quick reminder that there's a chance to put your questions to these folks too. Kate, carrying on with mine, at a kind of whole industry level, what's your perspective on where fashion's landed on whose responsibility it is to actually digitize fabrics? Because it's clear from my perspective, talking to a bunch of brands, talking to a bunch of suppliers, talking to a bunch of technology companies, that in some cases, the burden gets passed to the fabric supplier or a level up to the tier one manufacturer. In other cases, brands prefer to keep control of it themselves for standardization reasons, to make it easier to bring them into their product development systems and environments for costs and so on. And then there's the hybrid models that hinge on third-party service hubs in the regions where mills are situated, or to be too fair, sometimes in regions where brands are situated as well. As somebody with a pretty kind of similar to mine, like whole industry perspective, how do you see this balancing out?
So, yeah, we've also spoken to companies representing each of those different groups. And I think we've landed industry-wise at a place of a lot of perspectives. And I think there can be some general agreement among the brands and the third-party services that there's some logic behind having the suppliers provide the digital materials, whether that's the fabric manufacturer or the garment manufacturer. The idea being that they're creating the material or the product, and so they should own that source of truth that can then flow seamlessly downstream. Some of the third-party services like offer price incentives towards the supplier side rather than the brand side to help make it a bit more affordable and more attractive for them. I think, there are some brands, some bigger brands who've been doing this a bit longer, that I think they recognize that at least right now it's unrealistic to expect to have all the digital materials come from suppliers, especially like the sort of shorter term seasonal or specialty fabrics. So they see the need to retain some of that capability in-house, to retain some of the knowledge base around digital materials in-house. On the supplier's end, though, they don't always see it that same way based on who we've spoken to. Some suppliers can see the customer benefits and look at it sort of like an R&D investment. Garment manufacturers, there can be a perspective that they prefer the brands to take on the responsibility for making materials, because ultimately it's the brand customer that judges whether or not the material is accurate, and whether they can use it to help them make prototyping decisions. So, usually brands do that by defining their own standards and their own processes, right? So, from the garment manufacturer's perspective, they would kind of rather that the brand create a material they're happy with that they can then use. We find that it can be the most challenging to kind of make the case towards the fabric manufacturers because they're farthest upstream. And so they're farthest away from like getting the benefits right now out of digital materials as they currently exist. Digital materials in the current state and at their current capability as primarily visualization tool, they just truthfully, they add effort and they add expense to an already, expensive business. So it doesn't currently always provide a clear advantage from the perspective if you're making the fabric. So we've landed on disagreement, I think, in the here and now.
I think that I can echo that. And I think some of that cost and incentive stuff, Jenny, is your purview, and I want to ask you about that. So when we think about what it means to scale material digitization or supply of digital materials, increasing volume, building out infrastructure, generally growing the pie. What we're talking about from a material supplier's perspective is investing towards a future return. Investing towards providing a service that their customers will find valuable and that should become over time additive to their business. But the scale of that investment isn't small. You can be talking tens of thousands of dollars on just hardware alone.
That's
and
right.
material development production is already really price sensitive, as Kate mentioned. We're going to make it more price sensitive if all we do is find ways to add additional costs on top. How do we make that make sense? What are the right incentives for suppliers to make those kind of big investments in a way that's likely to be additive to their business instead of to just become an additional cost of doing business?
Well, it is very expensive. As you mentioned, the hardware is tens of thousands of dollars. So, in terms of seeing a return on investment, we would want to do that with brands that had a long-term business with us. And there needs to be, I think, in order, to go back to what you were saying, sort of whose responsibility is it? From my perspective, I do believe that the fabric manufacturers might be able to create the most or work with a third-party creator to build the most complete and accurate material file, because we have all of the fiber information, the construction information, the data that is the fabric. So I think that the fabric suppliers ultimately should have a handle on that. However, once we create that and invest in it, there's no way to hold on to it. It can just fly out the window. And once we provide that file to somebody, there's no way that I know of to secure that file and to link it to our physical fabric, which means, let's say we do a corduroy fabric, and we make it into a digital fabric file, and we all of the information is within the file, and it's passed, and then that means that we no longer retain the value of that asset that we've passed along. So I think for the suppliers to be able to invest, they need to have a sense of control or ownership to be able to edit and manage the data that's within the file and set permissions or know who's accessing it. And they need to be able to see this as a strategic investment and not just as a risk.
Yeah, and I think that framing as strategic is also something that needs to be shared by their brands as well, their brand customers. This, if they see it as just a knob to be turned, then that's the expectation that gets passed on, and that does not translate into a proper incentive. If the brand sees it as a strategic priority to be able to design, develop, simulate costs and everything else virtually, then that expectation, then the value of a supplier who's able to do that becomes higher over time.
Yeah. But just to be clear, we really feel that the brand is our partner along the journey. So I also feel that the brand has they should want to also protect the file. They should also want to protect the information, because they're also creating a whole product,
Yep.
And so they wouldn't want somebody else to get it either. And so it should almost be a small conversation between a limited number of people. And once you share something on a large platform or network, I think you lose control over it. And I don't think that brands want to lose control over their IP either, and neither do
Yep.
the suppliers. So there needs to be a sense that the brands can maintain their design and their fabrics and their control and work alongside us as a direct partner. And I think that
Yep.
fabric suppliers want that. And I think brands and garment factories, we have trust built along the supply chain. As long as we can somehow maintain a link between the digital fabric and the physical fabric, then also it holds a bit of truth to how those fabrics will perform.
Yeah, I think the key to that is if we're moving from a physical first trade, literally shipping samples of materials around the world, to a digital first trade, having digital rights embedded in that, it seems like a fundamental piece. So I think that's a very important thing to point out. Quentin, what's your perspective on this? Because BAKERMAT partially exists, after all, to fill a need that's emerged because fabric digitization can be really cost prohibitive to scale. So whether we're talking about emerging designers or major multinational brands, when you add up one-off hardware costs, software licensing, bringing in dedicated specialist talent, being able to own this as a brand, if that's what you want to do, it all adds up. Do you think brands and creators have the right incentives and the right level of predictability to make those investments? Or again, is that something that they look at as just potentially just an overhead that's not additive to this?
Well, not yet. I think at least not evenly. I think as you said also in your introduction, I think for large brands, the incentives are pretty clear. If you are able to do this in a big scale, you can increase efficiency, reduce your waste, have a faster go-to-market cycles, like all of this. But I think for smaller companies, designers, smaller brands or smaller manufacturers, the return only becomes positive once you reach a certain scale. And when you're scanning hundreds of fabrics and using them across teams and collections, then it makes sense. But if not, then the investment maybe in investing in hardware, software, and skilled people might not be sort of like the way to go. But it's basically why, as you mentioned as well, why we exist as BAKERMAT, because we do this as a service for a lot of people's, a lot of clients. So by making the investment, by us making the investment basically, and then doing this as a service to multiple, we are able to spread our investment in hardware, software, and skilled people across multiple clients and multiple years, which then lets us offer a very competitive price per material and make digitization in that way a lot more accessible to also smaller companies. Because we try to act as a shared resource basically between suppliers and brands, and try to help both sides basically access high quality digital materials without having to invest in this heavy infrastructure. So yeah, I think as we try to do that, I think along the way the return of investment becomes also clearer, especially when these digital fabrics maybe at some point start replacing physical samples, or at least part of that. Yeah, I think the incentives then will naturally grow stronger as well.
Perfect. That's a really good answer. Kate, from Cotton's side, you've been involved in doing some of this work, essentially. You've been involved in helping to digitize cotton fabrics for collections that made their way onto third-party platforms like Substance 3D, as well as your own CottonWorks libraries that you mentioned earlier on. Why did you take that work on? What did you see as the incentives for cotton producers and consumers for doing that? And how do you think about supporting those different parties if the demand for digital materials does continue to scale upwards?
So we started digitizing our materials for a couple of reasons, and I think they're really quite similar to, the rationale behind BAKERMAT's model, and why, New Focus decided to get into digitization too. We could see the benefits for the industry as a whole, and we wanted to help support that transition towards digitization. We know it can be too expensive for, some companies, smaller brands, the independent designers, universities, students. We know it's unrealistic for them to necessarily take all of that on. So we felt like offering our materials as a free resource in the materials library would be the best way for us to provide that concrete help where we could, given the fact that we don't manufacture fabric and we don't sell products. That was kind of our best contribution. I think the incentive is to ensure that cotton is a competitive and a viable option, no matter where or how the industry is working. And we can see that, this is the way that the industry works now. And it's getting more important rather than it's not just a hype bubble, as some of the other technologies that we've seen. It's getting more relevant, more helpful, and more valuable. I think, we've seen that showing materials digitally, we think that it does help companies better visualize and imagine what they could be doing with cotton materials. We've seen some benefits for our marketing efforts around our inspirational materials. And I think ultimately the hope is that the digital fabrics can serve as like a bridge between the inspiration and then the actual creation, the manufacturing of those fabrics, and eventually adoption into product. As a company, we think about supporting the industry, especially in the digital product creation area, from three angles. Resources, so that's our physical and digital fabrics, and then education. So we definitely want to share more information and make it more accessible, because we know that just getting an understanding of all this new tech and all the things that you need to know to make it happen, that's hard too. So webinars, seminars, one-on-one meetings, and then making connecting brands and retailers with capable manufacturers, maintaining those relationships, and fostering new connections through events and things like that. So that's kind of where we sit.
Great. And you said something key there I just want to underline, which is this isn't a pilot or a weird kind of offshoot way of working. 3D digital product creation in general has not been that for a long time, but material digitization and having access as a brand or designer to a library of completely accurate, reliable, timely materials you can use in 3D is very much the way that the industry works. The brands that are the most deeply embedded and the most advanced in this have hundreds of folks working that way, partnerships across all of their material vendors or their own approach with their own digital materials libraries. So it's not as though what we're talking about here is unproven or untested. What we are talking about here is what it means to then take that to the next level, and the different players that need to be involved in that, and how those incentives need to align. And the other thing I think we're talking about is slightly more technical, and I want to ask this one to you, Jenny, because it's easy to talk about digital materials like they're sort of an abstract entity, but what we're really dealing in, as you mentioned earlier, is a trade in digital files that represent fabrics, but at the moment are not currently the complete source of truth for those fabrics. So you can take a digital representation of a fabric, use it for design purposes to get an idea of drape and everything else that you need. You can use it for fit simulation. It's difficult, and then where things start to get a little bit more hazy is when you take it into production, when you take it into the real physical fabric and the real physical product. The digital material can be a very complete representation of it, but it's not the ground truth for it. What do you think is missing, technically speaking, from those files and the systems and standards that exist around them that would make them more useful in that respect, and as a result would make the trade in them more valuable?
Right. I mean, this is I think this is just such an important step going forward into the future, because as you mentioned, things we're already here right now working with digital materials, and the industry is not going to go backwards. It's only going to progress further into manufacturing. And the next step is not only to send files sort of downstream, but files eventually will be, I believe, shared back upstream. And it should get to a point where, you know, when we look at the computer systems or the systems within a manufacturer, and you have your product lifecycle management, and you have your ERP systems, those need to integrate with your 3D, and then those eventually need to be able to communicate with your MES manufacturing system. So, you know, and you're going to need to have information about your test results, your test reports, to be able to know how something performed and how to be able to change your machine setting to fix it next time. So there needs to be a way to build within the fabric file, perhaps information about speed of manufacturing, or the tension of the machines based on what kind of fibers you're working with, or the stretch recovery, or the tearing for your materials. You're going to need information about the hand feel in terms of your finishing, what kind of finishing you're going to be using. And then I think in order for it to scale, you're going to need a way that once the data goes into the machine for the automation process, then a product is produced, and then there needs to be a way to examine that product and compare it to the digital file to see accuracy or change. Because I think in order for a system to be able to run correctly, you have to be able to have a feedback loop in order to modify or correct it once it's been created. We can't just create something one time and then assume that it can be duplicated perfectly. So I think that the files need more layers of information, not only the construction and the yarn. You know, eventually there will be traceability information about where the country of origin is for those fibers. You'll depending on which, you know, one fabric supplier or one fabric producer might have more than one facility. And so there should be information about which facility produced the fabric, because you would want to be able to replicate it perfectly, whether it was produced at facility A, B, or C, and which machines produced it. And I guess there are a lot of nuances into that. But ultimately, we want to be able to get to the point where we're not only looking at the visual and the drape and the physics information of the fabric, but also how it can go back into the automation system and work with the manufacturing output.
Yeah, a complete digital twin, I guess, by one of a better term. For instance, kind of slightly related question to you, but a bit kind of higher up, sort of broad industry level. Where do you think that lack of digitization as it exists is currently holding fashion back? Because I know you've got your part of BAKERMAT's vision is for a different model for the way the industry works. What would successfully scaling the creation and the use of digital fabrics do to transform the way the fashion industry operates? You know, I can think of some examples of my own, like completely transformative lead time, drastically reduce waste, that kind of thing. But I'm sure you have a broader perspective as well.
Well, I think, first of all, I think Jenny said it also quite interestingly, because I think this transparency is a key thing that actually, if we would scale 3D materials and if we would improve it a lot and would invest in improving that, which needs a feedback loop as well, we would be able to make a more complete digital material and would be able to incorporate all of these things around digital traceability for materials like origin, etc. So I think that's one of the things that is very interesting at this moment. But another thing, what I see and find is that currently it's also limiting creativity, and I think that's quite controversial to say. But I think a lot of people say the new digital or 3D design workflow, it is actually making designers less creative because a lot of the software is doing the work for them, etc., etc., etc. But I believe that this evolution in 3D and digitization of the industry basically is giving us tools that help us do stuff. By doing that, we are basically making more efficient use of our time, and time is limited. And I think by doing so, we can do certain parts of the process. We can do it much faster, creating space to basically focus on what really matters. Think about better design, better materials, and make more informed decisions, while the digital and the 3D can help you save time to think about those things, basically. So yeah, and that's what I also mentioned before. We as BAKERMAT function as a link between suppliers and these digital creators, trying to bring them more, both sides basically, more into this 3D realm.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Cool. Brilliant. Before we move on to a kind of final word from each of you and then audience questions, Kate, I got one last question for you. One thing we haven't talked about so far is the idea of digitization, particularly the kind of digital twin side of things, which Jenny and Quentin have just painted as a way to offset uncertainty and a way for brands and suppliers to try and create a bit more stability in a very unpredictable market. You folks at Cotton Incorporated, I know you regularly publish updates on the macroeconomic indicators for the cotton trade. I did take a look at the most recent ones of those, and there's optimism on the consumer spending side, but ongoing confusion around global markets and trade policies. For companies on both ends, for your brands, for your suppliers, for everybody in between, that kind of uncertainty translates into unease. Do you see digitization of the fabric value chain, and I guess DPC more broadly, as having value in a way to shore up, protect, and maybe offset a little bit of that uncertainty?
I think DPC broadly can do that. I think it to a certain extent it is delivering on at least part of that. For brands who are at least getting a good portion of that full value. I think it's more around I wouldn't say it applies to the full value chain. I think it's more around the design, development, manufacturing, planning, marketing, selling kind of end. Generally, just because you can make better decisions earlier in the process, which you can test and you can market products before production or in tandem with production. Overall, you can then produce things that are more aligned with customer expectations. So your sell-through is better, and you don't have as many drop ads and that kind of thing. So you can do all of that in less time while you're reducing waste. And so overall, that's leading to that can lead to like a greater agility as a business and more ability to sort of de-risk quickly if things change. But I think that the digital materials in their current form it's just not quite at the stage yet where it can deliver on that kind of value that far upstream to the fabric manufacturers. Because right now you have to have that finished tested fabric first before you can go back and then create the digital material from it. Whereas, with the garment, at the garment level, it's the opposite way. You have digital first and then you have physical. But today we have to have physical fabric first before digital. And we would have to get to a point where, a lot of the things that Jenny added were, it was a full twin, but also, we could then sort of predict what the visualization, the appearance, the drape, we could do that before we made the fabric. And I think we're a ways off from that as of yet.
Yep.
Yeah.
Okay. Perfect. Good answer. Thank you very much. We've got a lot of audience questions. So I'm going to just do this final one. I'll ask each of you to just give me like a 30-second answer on what's something that the folks listening to this webinar today, something that they can take away and think about and try to act on that will help to better define what they want to accomplish with digital materials, setting kind of better, clearer expectations and standards and foundations. And Kate, you're still on my left, so I'm going to go to you first.
I think, especially if you're a supplier, I would say start talking to your customers and thinking about how could you work together to set standards that work across your customer base, that work for you as a company, and that also work across your customer base. And like, how could you start to build a more transparent and equitable partnership around digitization? And then once you have some of that information, then you can go together to the technology providers and start showing them what you would need in terms of the digital file. Bring them into the conversation to kind of consolidate into one unified digital material format that works industry-wide. Yeah.
Good ambition, good goal. I like it. Quentin?
For me, I think the next step is in alignment, not just on technology, but more so on intent. I think the industry, everyone together, needs to clearly define why it wants to scale digital materials, whether it is for efficiency, sustainability, creativity, or traceability. I think once we kind of can develop this shared purpose, I think standards and collaborations will follow. And it means that in short term, brands can start requesting digital twins if they source the physical material, or suppliers can start archiving physical and digital data together. I think if everyone sort of like starts to take one step in the same direction, this really can be sort of like the start of a new system of both sourcing as well as development.
Fabulous. Jenny, same to you, and then we'll move over to the audience questions.
So I think that this, for people who are not very familiar with this topic, maybe suppliers or people in the manufacturing side, and they don't know where to start with digital fabrics, and they just want to get going with something and test the waters. I think reaching out to BAKERMAT, reaching out to a company who creates these files for you is just a fantastic way to start. And that process of working with somebody, pick 10 fabrics that you like and digitize them, and try to, ask a developer to put them into an avatar and play around with it and see if it's something that your company can use as a marketing tool, and see if your brands that you work with or your garment factories that you work with are interested. And I think sometimes maybe people don't know where to start because it can seem overwhelming, but there are a lot of resources out there where you can subcontract and you can work with other people in the industry that can do a lot of the heavy lifting for you, because they're really experts at doing those digitization processes. And so, and then I think you need to step back and learn more and, study more and really try to figure out what the goals are. But I'm kind of a jump right in first kind of person. So I would just pick up the phone or email somebody who is an expert and say, how do I start? That's probably what I would do.
I will leave my phone number here.
Yeah.
I'm sure everybody here can be found on LinkedIn and online. But yeah, good advice. Right, we've got like 15 questions, so I'm going to try and condense these down and combine a few so that we can get through them ahead of the hour and give everybody the rest of their day back. I'm synthesizing a couple into this one, but are we able between us to give a perspective on what kinds of brands and sizes of brands are using digital fabrics and expecting digital fabrics? Is it just big companies? Is it SMEs? Who is it from a demand point of view who's there? Does Walmart, for instance, have an expectation for digital fabrics is in there? I can give my angle on this very, very quickly, which is it's fairly evenly distributed, but you will find that larger brands are the ones with the biggest demand simply because they're the ones with the most scaled digital product creation strategies. But I also admit that I'm a bit self-selective on this because we spend a lot more time talking to bigger brands than we do to smaller ones. So across the rest of you folks, I guess, Jenny, you'll have a perspective on this from the demand on suppliers, and Quentin, you'll have a perspective on this from the kinds of people who come through your door.
I would say, I would say about 65% of the brands that we work with are American brands. And I would say almost all of them have, they have digital within their product flows. So they're all touching on it. They're at different points of doing it in-house versus their supply chain members provide the data for them. And then I would say larger, like huge brands, I mean, they're definitely very reliant on, I think a lot of it's collaboration within the teams, and it ultimately will save a lot of cost for brands in terms of travel and sample expenses and approvals and all of these things. So I think large brands now are fully committed.
Quentin, how about from your point of view? Who do you see coming through your door and looking for demand on service?
Well, I think it's a little bit double because I think on one hand, the size of the company is not per se sort of like defining if they use it or not. It's basically how the company is built. Because on one side, you see indeed the big companies that were able to see sort of like this evolution come and started restructuring their internal processes to be ready and incorporate 3D inside their sort of new way of working. But on the other hand, you have very small young brands that incorporated this from basically from the start, or built their brand or their designs around the fact that they could be basically a one-man army with their computer. And I always joke around. We have like our part of our office in our store in Antwerp, and it's like basically it's 100 square meters store where I have physical fabrics from our store that we sell. We have the digital hub, and I have like an archive of boxes with swatches. But basically, I could run a fabric brand. I could run like a fashion brand on those 100 square meters, even unless. If I would skip the whole part of having the fabrics on the roll per meter there, I could do it on 35 square meters, basically. So I think it's not per se on how big the brand is that defines if they do it or not. We have a variety of clients going from people that just request indeed like just 10 fabrics to bigger companies that want to do full collections.
Yeah. Okay. Fantastic. Kate, I think this one's for you, maybe a little bit for me. Where do these files live from a design and development point of view? Somebody specifically asked, are PLM systems capable of holding these digital files? Are they compressible? Are they easy to load? Are they easy to share? What's your take on this one? How advanced is the average digital materials library, and where does it live?
Well, I think it can vary a lot company to company, and I think that's why you see some of the online, materials platforms, because there can be some challenges to overcome around all those issues. So I think that like different companies have different ways of managing them. We don't have a PLM system, so I don't know if they get held in PLM systems at other organizations. My
read is that it is really variable. So you will have people whose full material libraries, color libraries, digital material libraries do reside in PLM. You will have companies who have completely homegrown solutions for those things. It's extremely variable. The ideal would be for the library to exist in the same place that all the other critical product attributes and information exists. That would be the ideal scenario. The reality is is a little bit less than that. In terms of how compressible and usable and extensible your average digital material file is, it's use case driven, or it should be use case driven, which creates in a way of expectation on digital asset management. So if what you need a digital material for is visual in nature, you ought to be able to bring in a version of it that discards all the unnecessary attributes to get it as usable as it can be for what you need it for. If, however, your use case for it is directly driving production, then it needs to be fully complete. That's not something I think is properly codified and developed at this stage. There's a lot of digital asset management work that's done on finished 3D objects and assets that work on mesh and textures and things, but less of it, to my knowledge, on actual digital fabrics. Let's see. I had a question here that I can quickly just cross off, which would be, would part of a digital file, a more practical and complete digital fabric, be drape and how it falls on a mannequin? We've talked about that, or how it moves against different weather conditions and things. What you're talking about, whoever asked this, because this one is an anonymous one, is the difference between kind of visual representation, limited simulation, and full-blown simulation. And if you want to test a product and the materials that make it up against wind and rain and anything else that you want to do with it, you are pushing at the frontiers of simulation. There are lots of brands who want that. That's an active kind of in development area, I could say. Final question, and I know we've missed a couple, so hopefully we can take these up in email. Final question from the audience is, I think for Jenny, but Quentin, you might have a perspective on this, which is, what's the cost of developing one new physical fabric versus the amortized cost of developing a digital version of it? This person said, surely digital is more efficient, cost effective, and sustainable from that point of view.
So I would say a sample is around $500 US. You know, that's what somebody will pay. If we sell it to somebody, it's around $500 US for a roll, a whole roll. And then it was about $100 US for a digital complete. When I say complete, it has the metadata and the physical data, the drape and you know, the stretch, and that information was about $100 US for the digital file. But like Catherine said, we have to make the physical before we make the digital at this stage. So our cost is in both. And also we don't currently have the digitization machine. We outsource that. So so for us, I can't say on the total return of investment, because right now this is a learning journey for us, actually.
Perfect. Thank you very much. We are past time, as always, with these things. More questions than we have time to get to. We'll endeavour to take the ones that we didn't answer offline and come back to you. I know from my side, it's been a pleasure hosting this discussion. I've really enjoyed being able to quiz Kate, Quentin, and Jenny. I know I'm always happy for people to drop me a line on LinkedIn or email, and I'm sure everybody else here is as well. For me, that's thanks to everybody for taking part in the discussion, and thanks to everybody for listening. Kate, I don't know if you would like to do a quick sort of Cotton Incorporated capstone on this. Nope. Okay, perfect. On that basis, then I get final word. Everybody, thank you so much for joining and sharing your perspectives on this. Everybody in the audience, whether you're listening to this live or on demand, I hope you got a lot of value out of it, and I hope we get to do one of these again. I would encourage everyone to keep an eye out for the Interline's digital product creation report this December. Fully free to read, same as all the other ones. There'll be some perspectives on materials and wider digital product creation in there. Go investigate the work that Cotton Incorporated are doing in this space. Check out what BAKERMAT are doing, and take a look at what new Focus Textiles are doing as well. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Thank you, guys. Bye-bye.
Bye.
Goodbye.
Thank you so much.